Thank you. And please welcome Adel. Thanks for joining us on the stage today. I'm excited to talk about this with you because SES operates a complex and global fleet of satellites and is a key player in enabling global connectivity. So this is perfect to be able to speak with you for this conversation on building resilience into the supply chain and working internationally across continents, clients, and providers. So just to get us started, from where you sit, what does SES's operational footprint reveal about where the satellite supply chain is genuinely resilient and where maybe there's some fragility we should address?
So SES is a multi-orbit operator. Right? So a lot of people talk about Starlink and Amazon LEO and the whole LEO constellations. We actually operate in different orbits. And we believe that the overall architecture of space requires these multi-orbits. We'll talk about them a little bit later. Given that we are headquartered in Europe but have very large presence in the US and overall globally, our supply chain is spread between Europe, US, Asia. And in general, space supply chain has been single-threaded in many different critical components. In order to be successful, you actually have to contract for very long periods of time and we're very well ahead of what we're trying to do in terms of building constellation, launching satellites and operating satellites, which is very fragile. It's not helpful. So the whole industry is now working on ways of how do we de-risk that? And how do we create supply chains that are more resilient, that we can use more standards, we can use common components between non-terrestrial network, i.e. space networks versus terrestrial networks, which is what you see in 5G rollouts and fibers in the ground, et cetera. So today we're fragile, but we're working very hard to make that more robust.
And I know SES just announced Meosphere, your next generation constellation with K2 Space. For this audience, can you walk us through why this orbit, why this partnership, and what the investment model behind it says about where the industry is heading?
Okay. How many of you understand the different orbits in space? Can I see some hands? Oh, you're a very well-educated audience. Okay. So as you know, there are 3 orbits, and there may be more, but today there's LEO, which is the closest to Earth, anywhere between 300 kilometers to about 1.2 thousand kilometers. You can translate into miles, and I can't do the math. And because they fly so close to Earth, they have a limited vision of Earth, which means in order to cover the globe, you have to have a lot more satellites to do that. The next orbit is called mid-Earth orbit, MEO, and it's 8,000 kilometers above Earth. MEO has been widely used by governments. Some of our navigation satellites globally, GPS, some of the military satellites have been present in MEO for a long, long time. The only commercial player in MEO is SES. So we believe in that orbit, and the reason for that is driven by the economics and the special positioning of the orbit. Because you are 8,000 kilometers above Earth, you don't need as many satellites to cover the entire Earth because you have a bigger angle and a bigger view of Earth when you fly that high. And then the last orbit is the GEO satellites, which have been around forever. We've been around, by the way, for a cumulative 100 years. We just acquired Intelsat. Intelsat's been around for 60 years. Intelsat was the first commercial satellite operator that was actually developed and built by multi-country setup. U.S. was being the leader in creating that company. They've been around for 60 years. SES has been around for 40 years. So that's 100 years cumulative. And we started in the GEO arc. GEO arc is 32,000 kilometers above Earth. So you just need like 4 satellites, GEO, to cover the Earth. Right? You don't need a lot of them. But of course, every orbit has its pluses and minuses. I'm not going to go into a lot of details about it. What LEO is really good at is consumer broadband, low latency. It's fantastic for that. As you go higher, of course, the latency gets worse, but you can do other missions besides consumer broadband. The reason we like MEO, even though it's the harshest orbit away from Earth in terms of radiation, So when there are sun showers, I mean, we get the brunt of it in MEO just because of the physics and where it's located. I can explain it a little bit more. But we'll like it because it's very close to Earth, even though not as close as LEO. So it gives us the latency. It doesn't require as many launches because we don't need as many satellites. So economically, it's for us as a company, it's a model that works. So we just announced the next generation of these MEO satellites. It's our third generation. And we're very excited because we're actually using a US new space startup. It's called K2. I don't consider them a startup anymore. They've been around for 3 years, but they have evolved incredibly fast. And they'll provide our bus, which is what basically carries the computing power, what's called the payloads on that satellite. It has the solar panels, it has the engines to fly, if you will, etc. And we are building the payload that goes on top of it. And the combination of the two gives you the most advanced satellite capability you can have. And because we have big satellites, each is about 2.5 tons to 3 tons, we can do many missions with that satellite. So people talk about data center in space, well, we do edge computing in space today. Inter-satellite links, that's what we do today. Space awareness, we want to do more of that. Missile detection, we have enough space on the satellite to be able to do that. So we're very excited about that. A lot of governments are very excited about to explore how we can work with them.
And I want to talk a little bit about, I think there's a couple of unique characteristics of this partnership that go to some of that resilience question of how do we build in the resilience. I believe that Meosphere is going to be an iterative launch or iterative deployment, right? Does that address any specific, does that increase our resilience in terms of the supply chain?
Well, look, the space industry is evolving at an incredible speed, unprecedented. If you look at the last couple of years, the industry doubled in its size from 300 billion to 600 billion. I think we're more than 600 billion. McKinsey did the study to say by 2035 we could be 1.8 trillion. I think it will be much more than that. SpaceX valuation alone is going to be 1.2 billion, 1 trillion, maybe even more, and so on. So it's evolving, and the industry is disrupted massively by the entrance of these new space players. Starlink is being one of them. SpaceX is one of them. SpaceX changed the game not only from a satellite perspective, but also from an access to space, right? They are now like the reliable rockets that we can ride whenever we need to launch satellites. It was not the case for many, many decades. But there are many other smaller companies that are innovating, that are changing the way space works. Our challenge as a legacy player is 100 years, right? Cumulative to be in the industry. We've worked all of our lives with the well-known players like people like Boeing and Lockheed Martin and Raytheon and Northrop Grumman and Airbus and Thales, etc. And the pace of innovation of these existing players and the cost points of these existing players are no longer competitive. So if you think about how long did it take us to develop a new satellite or a new constellation, it's between 5 to 7 years. That's an eternity. It's an eternity. The new players are like innovating every year. So they bring new capabilities every year. So we have to transform. So the reason we're tapping into the new space companies and changing the way we innovate is because to drive that speed of innovation. And the costs need to come down. Does it make us more resilient? Not necessarily, right? What MEO does, it creates resilience, right? Because the reason you need 3 orbits is if you have failures, like for example, on the ground, when you lay out fiber and you put up a data center, you typically would want 3 different fiber lines coming into your data center, minimum, from 3 different companies. And they all need to be physically separate. Can't have them in one duct coming into the data center. They have to be very different, one coming from the north, one from the south, one coming, et cetera, et cetera. Same thing in space. If you're building a network, a resilient network, you need multi-orbit because one will fail. One will be attacked, right? Independent what it is. And to be able to move your data and move your waveforms between orbits is what makes us more resilient.
I want to talk a little bit about a case study. I love something concrete. Let's talk about something concrete. SES has so many interesting global deployments that we could talk about. But one that really caught our eye was that SES recently deployed satellite capabilities to support refugee communities in Chad. And so moving past just the short-term emergency response to sustained connectivity, which is, I think, is really important to a lot of the people that are in the room today. What did the deployment in Chad or similar deployments reveal about satellite supply chain strengths and weaknesses? And how can industry and governments both build more resilient systems for the humanitarian needs, but also these long-term commercial needs?
So first of all, our purpose as a company, and many space companies, is grounded in addressing the digital divide across the globe. That's the core of space companies. Majority of us, right? And our purpose as a company, our declared purpose is space to make a difference. So we do a lot of work in Africa, we do a lot of work in Amazon, we do a lot of work in Southeast Asia, and we don't realize this today, but satellites provide the consistent connectivity for these remote spaces. Islands, nations that do not have the capability to build fiber networks or mobile networks, et cetera, et cetera. And that's been kind of the core of our business for ages, before space became a warfighting domain. And as it became a warfighting domain, our opportunity to work with governments on other things became quite significant. But at the core, we're about connecting the unconnected. As a matter of fact, our existing MEO constellation that exists today, which was built with Boeing, that's the most advanced system in space. Each satellite can generate more than 6,000 beams simultaneously, and beams are the ones that deliver the connectivity. It's called O3B mPOWER. And O3B stands for other 3 billion. There are 3 billion people unconnected in the world. And we do both things. We do emergency response. We have great partnership with the Wicker Foundation. We got recognized as a winner in Africa for that, where we connect schools, we connect hospitals, we enable education. And through that work, we're actually driving economic growth in these areas, right? So the one you referred to in Chad, which was driven with Luxembourg government emergency response to be able to connect things when the networks fail, is one initiative. But actually, we do a lot more in connecting very remote villages and campuses that is just very difficult to get to with the terrestrial networks. And that's a big part of our business, not necessarily economically, right? But from a belief and from the foundation of, we've got to connect these folks, we've got to change, we've got to fix that digital divide.
I really appreciate that both in this conversation and some of the earlier panels, we've talked a lot about Africa and other global south regions as opportunities as opposed to simply cases for assistance. But I know sometimes there's difficulty working with partners because of risk tolerances. Can you talk a little bit about how SES has found the way forward to be able to work with maybe some difficult situations?
Look, we accept the risk profile that comes with that, right? Of course, there are different risk levels, right? I mean, this is public news. I mean, we have a big facility in Israel, and it was just hit, right? It was hit by Hezbollah, and it's not hard to find us. If you go into Google Maps, you'll see that the biggest teleport in Israel is SES. It's a commercial site. It's actually the site that does NFL Super Bowl distribution globally. It does PGA, it does ATP, it does Formula One, et cetera, et cetera. So there is a level of tolerance we have. And when we go into these remote geographies, not to say that Israel is a remote geography, but when you go to Africa, when you go to the Amazon, when you go to Southeast Asia islands, right? There is a certain level of tolerance we have because we need to build ground infrastructure in order to create a global network. So people think about satellite companies are guys in space, but actually we run more than 500,000 fiber networks around the world. The reason we need that is you need to land the signal, right? You can transmit the signal in space, you can capture the signal from the ground, but you need to bring it down to Earth. So we have to have these ground infrastructures all over the world, right? And some of the big ones sit in these remote islands, right? And so we built that tolerance for risk. We always protect our people first. So for example, the reason I went to Israel is at that time when the war started, we mandated that everybody works from home. And we have an agreement with the Israeli government that we need to get alerts first because we need to send our people to the bunkers. So our people's safety is something we do not compromise in, right? So we look for local partners as well who are local and that live in these countries. We educate them how to put these infrastructures in place. We educate them how to manage them. And our experts travel all over the world. And we work with governments, right? So we work with governments to get certainties and protections and things like that. So we don't typically ask them to pay for a lot of this stuff, but we ask them to protect us, right? Physically as well as, make sure that we have the right capabilities we need them.
I think as we come to the close of our discussion, I want to finish with maybe a question that's a bit on the nose at the Space Diplomacy Forum. But the private sector's role in space diplomacy has clearly evolved in the modern age. I would love to hear your perspective on SES's accountability in this role as a diplomat and where interoperability fits into that picture.
My biggest worry as the CEO of SES is actually the geopolitics right now. Because by nature, we're a global player, right? We don't build constellations that are just local because we surround the Earth, right? And for 100 years, SES has been a well-recognized player on both sides of the Atlantic, right? We have big presence in the US. We have the highest level of security clearances to do work with the US government, and we're present in Europe, and we have the same thing in Europe, and we run them quiet independently to make sure we comply with the security requirements. I'm very worried with today's world, right, and where we're heading and how could that impact our business. Starting with regulatory environments, for example, Europe just put out a proposal for a new Space Act, which is a regulatory framework that actually causes problems for us as a European because we are a licensed US operator in addition to being a licensed European operator. And I'm very worried about protectionist environment that we're beginning to see and the bifurcation of, between the Western allies, right? It's a very big worry for us, not only from the supply chain point of view, because you started the conversation with supply chain, but actually regulatory frameworks. How do we work? How do we share? Today, the way we work in space, we work very closely with Starlink. We work very closely with Amazon. We work very closely with governmental agencies on both sides of the Atlantic in order to be able to coordinate what we're doing in space. When there is an accident in space, it creates havoc. I mean, a failed satellite, and we had a couple of those that explodes or breaks up, and it generates thousands of particles, and our satellite can be destroyed with a millimeter particle because they travel like bullets. Right? And so coordination and making sure that we're all working together is super critical for this industry to be successful going forward. So this topic is real important.
I'm going to give you one quick hit to finish this out. I'd like to finish with a look to the future. If SES could design a satellite network with no limitations, what are the capabilities or the innovations that you would prioritize to achieve global connectivity?
Well, it's beyond global connectivity now, right? Because our current designs are built in order to be able to do other missions than just connectivity. We see space, I mean, Elon talks about data centers in space. I think that's a little bit out, but it will happen, right? There will be data center space. But beyond data center in space, there'll be manufacturing in space. There'll be pharmaceutical guys are already looking at, could we do better in terms of research and manufacturing in a no gravity environment, right? Does that give us an economic advantage? There are other chemical productions and manufacturing ideas that people are putting together. So our view of space, it's actually shifting the paradigm, because everything that space has been doing to date, it's been about making our lives on Earth better. And it's shifting to a different paradigm, which is moving human life into space. Right? So there will be an incredible amount of changes that are coming up, and we're excited about that.
Well, thank you so much. Please join me in thanking Adel for this wonderful conversation.